Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Friday's webinar from Anicca Digital. It's myself, Anne Stanley, and Jess. We're acting as hosts today, but our speaker is James. You seem very far away, James, but I can see you there in the background. Good morning.
Yeah, sorry about that. I need to zoom my camera in maybe or something.
It's fine, no problem at all. So what we're going to be doing today is James is going to be doing a very practical exercise on using Excel and some other tools to sort analyze marketing data. But before we get going with that, what we thought we would do is do a little bit of housekeeping and start with a poll. So for everybody, there isn't any handouts for this session, but we will be sending the video around afterwards, so you can get the recording of the session. I'm just going to pass straight over to Jess, who's going to run the poll for me. And this is about how much experience you've got. So over to you, Jess.
Okay, so how experienced are you using Excel? A complete beginner, I rarely use it. Basic skills, I can add up columns, create simple formulas, only use it when required. Intermediate, I can do the above or create graphs, but use it quite regularly. Reasonably experienced, I use it often and can do the above plus some advanced features like pivot tables. Or an expert, I feel confident in most functionality and regularly use pivot tables, VLOOKUP, etc.
So you're going to need to tell us how many people. I've noticed a typo, sorry. It was too small when I was doing it. How many people have filled it in, and then that will give us an idea of the numbers, and then I'll read out. Then if you read out the sort of percentages. It looks a really even split, you know.
Yeah, we've had about 54 so far.
Wow. Okay, so if you read out the answers for the benefit of the video, then.
Okay, so 11% are complete beginners, 26% know the basics to add up to columns, create formulas, etc. 19% are intermediate, 25% are reasonably experienced, and 16% are experts.
Brilliant. It does change a little bit. So you've got a reasonably experienced team here, James, but you have got a few beginners. So you're going to have to start simple and move up. So over to you. I'll be in the background. I might just make sure everything's okay. And then I think we'll get rid of all the cameras today, so give everybody a little bit more room. And also, if you go top right, you should be able to expand your screen. I can see your screen okay, so I'm going to turn my mic off. If we'll come back into the room about 10 to 10, then we can have a bit of a conversation. But I'll try and answer as many questions as I can for you, James. So over to you, James.
Great. So yeah, hi everyone. This is a basic introduction. Well, basic to intermediate, I would say, maybe higher intermediate in terms of what I call data handling, or what we sometimes also call data manipulation in Excel. And the reason that we created this little webinar, and we also sometimes present similar stuff a bit more extended within our DMI courses as well, is that, yeah, when we were running our DMI courses and we were teaching people, and we were teaching them about stuff like technical SEO, and, you know, here's Screaming Frog, which will crawl a whole website and it spits out loads of data and information. But then a lot of people were kind of coming back to us and they were saying like, well, this is really useful, but how do I, you know, kind of like export and combine this data together? Maybe I want to combine some Screaming Frog data with some Search Console data to prioritize the pages that I'm going to work on, things like that. And so it quickly became apparent that actually there's quite a lot of people who are getting into digital marketing who, unlike myself, because working back in the day from 2009 onwards, obviously, we had far fewer tools like Ahrefs Cloud Crawler, which would automatically pivot all of the data into the top issues. So it pretty much just was Screaming Frog and nothing else in terms of SEO and technical site crawling. And yeah, so obviously because of that, I just learned natively as per my role to basically handle and manipulate data and information, stitch data together from different tables and stuff like that, which is what I call data stitching, which is part of data manipulation or data handling, as we might otherwise call it. And so, yeah, we came up with this webinar to kind of help you guys out. So the first thing that I'm going to teach you guys is some basic data stitching using the VLOOKUP formula. And essentially this will help you to kind of like stitch data together between different tables. So you can see we've got a couple of different tables here. We've got a transactions table, which contains, you know, some kind of made up information regarding transactions. We're going to start with this rather than pure SEO data, just so that you can kind of see the general and simple benefit of stitching data together, and stuff like that. And so one table we have has more information on the customers. So it's a customer ID table, might be stored somewhere in your database. And the other table is the transactions table, a separate table in your database. But what you might want to do is you might want to get a breakdown of revenue by job title. But you can't do that natively because obviously the transactions table, it doesn't contain the job title, whereas the customer table does. But both tables contain this customer ID field here, and you can use this to kind of snap the data together, as it were. So we're going to start by learning a little bit about VLOOKUP and how to operate that formula to kind of pull data in. Because obviously, yeah, one thing that we could do, obviously, you can just copy and paste the data from over here to over here. That's not really going to work because the customer IDs aren't necessarily in the same order. So you can't just simply copy and paste. The other option that you would have manually is to say, oh, here's customer ID 1, and that's John. So wherever we see customer ID 1, which is John, so here, here, and here, maybe a couple of other places as well, you're going to paste that manually. But obviously the table that I provided here is a very simplified cut down table, right? You might have hundreds or thousands of transactions that you're looking to match this data against. And so copying and pasting the data manually is going to take an excessive amount of time, and it's not really going to be viable. So the first thing that we want to look at is the VLOOKUP formula. So if I essentially just enter the cell, the first cell where I want the data to start coming through, so in this range, the first cell is here, which is E3. I can type the equals character, which will launch my automatic formula control that you can see over here on the left on this drop down. Mine is automatically set to VLOOKUP because that's the one that I use the most. So Excel kind of knows, you know, if he types equals, he's probably most likely looking for the VLOOKUP formula. But yours may be blank or may say something else instead, like equals sum. And so in that instance, if you type equals and it says something that you're not looking for, and if you don't have then VLOOKUP in this drop down list here, you just go to the bottom of the context menu and click on that more function. And then in here, you can search for a function. So if I just search for VLOOKUP, you can see that it comes back. We can select that, click OK. That will then port VLOOKUP to your automatic formula launching context menu, so that as soon as you type equals, you'll get VLOOKUP appearing in here. And that's what you want to do. For myself, this is kind of the bread and butter formula that I usually use to auto launch. So once you've done that, you can type the equals key, and then you can just tap on this menu in the top left here that says VLOOKUP, and you can just click on that. And it will launch this really handy graphical user interface that will help you to actually construct the formula. So the first thing that we want to do is apply the lookup value. So if I just click this little arrow key here that is upward pointing, flashing blue, what I want to do is I want to select the customer ID because the lookup value is kind of like the unique identifier that we want to use to snap the data together, if that makes sense. So in this instance, we're going to use the customer ID because where the customer ID is the same, the job title will then be the same. So that's what we're going to do. In this case, that's C3. So I've applied that. And then in terms of the table array, this is the table that you wish to fetch the data from. And the first column must match the unique identifier that you've previously specified. So the lookup value which I specified was the customer ID in cell C3. And when I launch this box here to do the table array, I'm going to select the table over here with the first column being the unique match column, which kind of matches the C3 value that we set, which is the customer ID, because those things are the same. And you're going to want to count along or drag along from the top here in terms of dragging these columns to the value that you want to pull back. And the value that we want to pull back, you can see there as I'm dragging across, Excel is kind of giving this very tiny dialog box with automated number of counts. So it's giving the row count for the selection. Because I'm selecting columns, it's selecting all possible rows, which is just over 1 million, which is what Excel can handle. And it's also giving a number for the column count as well. So we want to pull back the data that is in the fourth column, and you can see there it says 4C, right? So as you're constructing the formula, that's something to make a note of as you're dragging across. So I want to pull back the job title from the customer ID. I've had to drag across, and you can see there it says 4C, which is the fourth column, right? So we've now selected the range. We can apply that. So the range is for the table array is H to K. And the column index number is the column for which you wish to pull back the values. And as I've just shown, you know, we were selecting along and it said the fourth column. So we're going to put the number 4 in here. That's why it's important to make a note of that number. And then the range lookup is almost kind of like a match type. And if you just want it to be an exact match, then usually the character that you enter in here is just always 0. And then we just click OK here. And you can see that it's pulled back the job title based against the customer ID, which is exactly what we're looking for. You can then copy this here, this cell in E3, which is the formula we've created up here. So you can just copy and paste this down, and it will automatically adapt the formula to go down to the next row, down to the next row. It will continue citing the correct customer ID. And you can see that what we have now is essentially we have a nice little table whereby we've used VLOOKUP to essentially pull in the job title specifically against the customer ID. So what this would allow us to do is now we have more items of data next to each other, which we didn't have next to each other before. So previously we had job title over here isolated in this table with no revenue at all. And over here we had the transaction ID and transaction metrics, but we didn't have the job title. Now we have those things next to each other. And that's going to be useful for analysis in terms of basically telling which job title is most lucrative over a given period of time for revenue specifically.
James? Hi. Yep. We've got quite a lot of beginners. So there's 2 things I'd like you to do. I'd like you to show how you copied down the whole column again, but also because people aren't even used to some basic functionality, could you just show them how you could sum the revenue, for example? Because I think understanding formulas is quite useful. So if you could undo what you've just done in that copy and paste, and then show people how you did that, I think that would be really useful. And I've got a question for you because I can't remember the answer to this. Has Google Sheets got VLOOKUP functionality as well?
Yeah, it does. So essentially, and I don't know how they've managed to wangle this, but most of the formulas are almost identical between Google Sheets and Excel. So there are some that are different. So for example, I think the way in which you launch very advanced formulas like array formulas and stuff is slightly different. But for all of the basic functions like VLOOKUP and stuff, I think the formula syntax is relatively the same. And I think that's because Microsoft were forced to kind of like basically declare the methods for all of their different software in terms of calculations and stuff many years ago.
And I guess if everybody else in the room is probably thinking the same, you can do exactly the same and copy across the first name and the last name as well. You don't just have to do the sales rep.
Oh, yeah. And so for instance, I typed in here column 4, which is going across to the 4th column here to get the job title. So if I wanted last name instead, you can see that's the 3rd column. So if I just change this 4 to a 3, then you can see it then brings back the surname instead, right? It's It's the same thing. You just kind of like count across as you're dragging across when you're using the GUI to construct the formula. And you don't always have to go first to last. You can go first to second or first to third. And you can just you can use the GUI to do that, or you can construct the
GUI,
formula.
for everybody's benefit, is the GUI, which is the graphical user interface.
Yeah,
so
the graphical user interface, which is when I press equals and select VLOOKUP here, and it comes up with this helper to construct the formula rather than writing it all manually inside of the formula bar here. And that's why I kind of taught you guys to do that first, because the GUI, when you're using single functions on their own, like VLOOKUP, it's very helpful. When you're using multiple functions together, like index and match, it doesn't really help with that, but that's something we'll get into in a minute. So. But in terms of what Anne has just been saying, yeah, so in terms of copying and pasting this formula down, on my keyboard, it was literally Control-C and then hold Shift, click to the end of the range, and then hit Control-V. If you want to be more specific and you want to paste just the formula without any formatting or anything else, then it would be Control-C to copy the cell, Shift-click to the end. You can then right-click, and you can see here where it says Formulas F, in the context menu under the paste options, you can just paste the formula specifically, and that will do that without.
And if you, for example, so this is something that I do a lot. If you wanted to then copy that onto another sheet, you'd be copying the formula, but you'd have to do the paste special and copy it as a number if you were copying it to another sheet, would you?
Yeah, and that makes sense, and particularly if you're operating in between different spreadsheets, right? So, for example, in this spreadsheet, it's not really a problem to leave it as a formula because the source data is in other cells in the same sheet. But if you have another entirely different XLSX workbook and you're doing a VLOOKUP from one Excel sheet workbook to a completely separate document, then in that particular case, because you don't know that that other separate sheet might always remain available, someone might delete it or you might get problems in that area. In which case, what you'd want to do is copy all of the formula results here, and then right click, and you do this little 1, 2, 3 thing here, which is paste as values. And that then makes all of the data static. So all of the data is then exactly what has been pasted in, and it's not operating via a dynamic formula anymore. So that's an important point. Thanks, Anne.
And then can you just show them how you could do a sum of the revenue, just to show, because some of these guys have never done even simple formulas before.
So what I'd do is I'd probably just mark something up down here. So I'd put a text-based field here like this that says sum, just so I know that what the value is in here that I'm going to put in. And then I would just type equals sum like this, open a bracket. And as soon as you've opened a bracket, all you need to do is use the mouse to select the range.
And can you show them using the GUI again? So
yeah, I'll do that as well. And then you can just press the enter key and it does the sum here, which is really useful. So in terms of the GUI implementation of the same thing, so we're going to go over here. As you can see, it wants to launch VLOOKUP because that's what I recommend to put in here. And you can see we've got sum here, so I'm going to click on that. And so number one, so essentially, I don't think you need number 2 or number 3. You just go into number 1. And you then just select the whole entire range like this, so that you have this range reference in here, which is. And
can you just explain what D3 is and D25 is? Because again, they might not know what that is.
Yeah, so D3 is the start of the range. So you can see here, if I go to where it says revenue, the first figure is this £50 in here, right? That's the first revenue figure that I want to sum. And you can see if you check column D and row 3, you can very quickly see that that's cell D3 up here. And then the last one in the range is D25. So again, that's row 25, column D. And you can see that when I select that cell, it gives the reference of D25. And so the sum has to be D3 to D25 because that is the range of the revenue figures that we're looking to sum.
Brilliant. So. Thank you. I think you've brought everybody up to speed with regards to basic formulas now.
Cool. Okay, that's really good. So essentially, obviously, VLOOKUP itself has some limitations in terms of how it operates. So the main thing that we have here is that obviously we're snapping the job titles in by comparing specifically the customer ID, right? So where the customer ID is the same over here as it is over here, then this table will look at this customer ID, it will go over here, find the job title, and it will accurately port that back over here. That's all fine, and that's well and good, but the problem with the VLOOKUP formula specifically is it'll only go left to right, okay? So if the data which you wish to pull back is to the left for some reason of the unique identifier that you want to use, then VLOOKUP won't work because it can't go right to left, right? So there are other formulas that you can use instead if for some reason your data is in a weird shape. Usually speaking, your key unique identifiers will be towards the left of a table, because that is just how people are taught good tabular database data formatting. So if you have a good developer, most of the stuff which is more unique and more of a unique identifier should be towards the left of a table. But you might be using some kind of weird custom CMS or something, maybe built by someone less experienced, whereby, for example, the customer ID might be over here, and then you can't use VLOOKUP because it would require the job title to be to the right hand side, and it's not. So in that situation, you have two you essentially have two options. One is that you can take that data into Excel and you can manually reformat it so that it's in the correct order. But if you can't do that, if you're having issues in that particular area, you might need to use an entirely different formula instead. So in this instance over here, we kind of have the same two tables again, but in this instance, the job title is to the left of the customer ID. And here I've created a formula which uses two separate functions. It uses index and match both together in order to do a kind of more advanced lookup that can look in any different direction. And so when I launch this formula in here, I need to get rid of the space. There we go. You can see the index match is capable of pulling back the data in the correct direction. You can also use XLOOKUP instead, which is kind of like a more modern, slightly more advanced VLOOKUP. And it's simpler than using index match, but it's slightly less flexible. So what I would recommend is personally get to grips with VLOOKUP first, because in terms of index match and VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP, VLOOKUP is the most basic, but it's also the most restricted because it can only go. I mean,
if you've got a table and you've copied it from somewhere and the customer ID was, say, the 5th column, there's no reason why you can't copy that column and put it on the left-hand side.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's what I did over here. I've mocked up the formula now because I've been playing around with the data too much. But yeah, you can obviously reformat the data yourself. The only time that's going to be a problem is if you're doing something really advanced, like you're using Excel's advanced functionality to directly connect to an SQL database and pull back an individual table from an SQL database, which makes it kind of more, it's more like dynamically inserted and you can't play around with the data so much. So in some instances, it is useful to learn XLOOKUP and it is useful to learn how to use index and match together. Because they are so complex, those are things that I've just kind of shown them working, but I'm not going to get into too much detail now.
Okay.
But my homework is going to be for people, first of all, get familiar with VLOOKUP, which is the most basic and easy to use data stitching formula to stitch data together from different tables. And once you've got your head around that, then potentially explore XLOOKUP, which is slightly more complex. And then when you've got your head around that, potentially
so let's forget index and match because that's too complicated for today. Why don't we do XLOOKUP quickly? Have you lost sleep?
So actually,
or have you not got enough time?
No, so that's just kind of like homework that I'm giving to people in terms of, you know, if you master VLOOKUP and you're like, I want to do something more cool and more flexible, look into XLOOKUP, look into index match. But as I've said, I'm not going to go through them in detail now.
Okay.
The next thing that I actually want to go into is pivot tables, because they're fairly essential in terms of kind of visualizing your data within Excel. So if we go back to our table over here, where we did the index match, which is essentially the same results that we would have got from doing the earlier VLOOKUP as well. So you can use either of those formula really. You can see that we now have the revenue and also the job titles in a single table. And the reason this is useful is because now that everything's in the same table, now we can actually begin to create some pivot table based visualizations. So before I actually create a pivot table, which is going to be a very simple pivot table, the first thing that I want to explain is essentially what pivot tables are. So pivot tables essentially take source data from a main table, and they kind of shrink it down with tallies of different numbers of different metrics and things, and they create a simpler and smaller, more efficient slice of your main table. And the reason that that's useful is that such tables tend to be more compatible when you're creating charts. So if you try and create a chart directly from the source data here, it's going to be very fiddly, and it's going to count a bunch of stuff you don't want it to count, and things like that, because all we're really interested in is the revenue and the job title. We're not interested in these two fields here. And because of that, essentially a number of these rows could kind of collapse and sum into each other. And so that's essentially what we're going to do. So just for your own knowledge, so pivot tables, they're almost used to shrink big tables into smaller tables to make them easier to work with in terms of generating graphs and charts and visualizations. That's essentially what they're for. So we're going to come over here and we're going to click the insert button at the top of Excel. And you'll see there's this drop down here. There's this big pivot table button. So we don't actually need to click the drop down. You can just click the actual pivot table button at the top here. And this again will launch a GUI, which, as Anne has said, is a graphical user interface that is in a similar way to the VLOOKUP one that I showed you guys, which helped you to construct a formula. This is going to help you to construct a pivot table. So up here in this text area here is the table/range. And what we want to select here is the source table, which contains all of the information that we want to kind of condense down into a little sliced pivot table, so that we have a slice of data which will be easier to create charts and graphs, as I've just said. So what we're going to do is just to the right of this text area here, you'll see an up arrow button. We're going to click on that. And we're now going to go back to one of our tables that we've created. And what you want to do is just select a whole table in terms of the data that you want to work with. So in this case, I've just selected the entire table where we have stitched together the revenue data and the job title data. And then in this little GUI over here, you'll see to the right, there's a little down arrow. I'm going to click that. And then I'm just going to click OK. And you'll see immediately what happens is inserted into the sheet, we have this kind of pivot table dialog box. And then over to the right hand side of the sheet, so I'm just going to tick and untick a box just to kind of visually focus you on that area. We have this big pivot tables field pane that kind of like pops up. And this is where we can select the different fields from our main table in terms of what we want to see within our pivot table, in terms of how to slice it down. So in terms of the rows, I'm going to use the job title. So you can now see we've got a table that contains rows that has all the different job titles in there. I'm also personally going to, if you see in the top left, just where I'm kind of selecting up here, there's this options button and it's kind of just up here in the top left. I'm also going to go to the totals and filters and just turn off the grand totals because I don't really need to see that information at the moment. I just want to see just the information that I'm looking for. And then the next thing that we can do is we can say, well, okay, now we've got a table that contains all the different job titles. What was the information that we wanted to see? And of course, that's the revenue. So you can see the revenue here in the pivot table fields. and I'm just going to click and hold and drag that down into values like this. And now what we have is we have a sum of revenue by job title. So another thing that I can do as well, if I want to do this, is I can select these cells, because we know that, you know, these numbers are accurate. So 120 pounds, 22 pounds, but these items are coming through just as plain numbers. So if I right click and I click format cells, which is the second entry down in the context menu there, you get this dialog box appear. And instead of general, I can change this to currency, and then select your relevant symbol for the currency data. For me, it's British pounds. Usually for most currencies, you're going to want 2 decimal places, and then click OK. And that then converts this into an actual currency figure, which is going to be a bit nicer when we kind of create our chart from this. So going down the left-hand side here, you can see that, you know, we've got all of these different things. We know these are job titles. So this heading here that just says row labels is a bit generic. So I'm just going to call this job titles instead. And then over here, I'm just going to call this revenue like this. There we go. So we've got our job titles, we've got our revenue. The next thing that we can do is, now that we've got a really condensed cut down of our table, so you can see this is the source table here where all the information comes from. But actually, all we wanted to see was the job titles split by how much revenue kind of came in. So we can select this table that we've made over here, and we can go insert, and you can see it at the top here. We've got all of these different little boxes, so you can create all different kinds of charts and graphs. I'm going to click the little drop down next to the pie chart. And I'm just going to create a pie chart of this so we can see where all the revenue and stuff comes from. I might make this a little bit larger here, and I might just give this a little bit more of a sensible chart title. So I might call it revenue by job titles. That seems to make sense, right? So there we go. And yeah, you've got your legend over here that you can kind of customize a bit. So I might make that a little bit larger, so it's taking up a bit more space. Might pump the font size up a little bit of that. And then, yeah, we've got our pie chart over here. So if you actually just click on the pie chart until all the different segments are selected, which you can tell by these little kind of dots that appear going all the way around the chart selection. Once you have that kind of selection, another thing that you can do is you can just right click and you can click this button in the context menu called Add Data Labels. And obviously you can click on the chart area, you can resize the actual pie chart itself. If it automatically rescales in a way that you don't like, you can get it looking a bit visually nicer. And you can now see that we've got a breakdown in terms of a pie chart of all of the different revenue build up in terms of different job titles. And in terms of this, it's kind of nice, but also looking at the absolute figures might not be that useful. So if you click on one of the data labels, it should then by default select all of the different data labels. And the data labels are the items on the pie chart which specify the absolute amount. So that little text box that says 120 pounds or 22 pounds, those are all data labels. So if you click off the pie chart and then just click on one of the data labels, it should select them all. If you then right click one of the data labels, you should get this context menu right at the bottom that says format data labels. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to click the percentage box, and then I'm going to unclick the value box. And now you can see that we've got a percentage readout.
It's really interesting, James, because I always use the plus in the top right. I never do it in the individual one. So can you? Yeah.
Oh,
so
do you not?
You can play around with all this stuff here as well.
Yeah, so you can also do, so you can untick and tick different elements in here, like the data labels, the legend,
and
as
also
well.
you can change the position and stuff as well, can't you? And all sorts of.
You can, yeah. You can drag bits around. You can change the font size. So this was revenue by job titles, like that. You can bold certain areas of the text, like this. You can change colors as well, even of partial elements of text, like that. And so, yeah, that's essentially how to create a pivot chart from the data. But you know, one thing that you might realize is that also there are different ways to subjectively interpret the information from the pivot table. So let's do a copy of this pivot table and let's paste it again down here. And we're going to play around with it and we're going to make this
And
slightly
when
different.
I play with pivot tables, I tend to do paste as an exact number, because if I don't want to play around with it as a pivot, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, especially for copying and pasting charts. So if I have this chart here and I want to copy and paste this chart and then reconnect it to a separate table, I actually can't do that because charts created from pivot tables can't be disconnected from their pivot table data source and reconnected to another separate table. So obviously, one thing that you can do to get around that is you can copy your pivot table. You can paste it as values, maybe paste the formatting over the top. And then this is just a normal table, not a pivot table. And if you were to then create a chart based on this instead of from the actual pivot table, you could then disconnect that chart and connect it to another separate table further down, which could actually speed up your
And explain
chart
to the
production.
guys
So you
why
kind of
one's a pivot table and one isn't, because obviously you can change this. You could change that table quite easily from the pivot, couldn't you? And put a different thing in there, like you could put ID number or something. So that table you've got top left is dynamic.
It's dynamically
exactly
created based on, so you can see the pivot. So on the right hand side, just over here where I've just popped up that little dialogue, you have this pivot table fields. And, you know, this is the pivot table that we created through insert pivot table. And it's almost more like you look at all of the different fields as dimensions and metrics. And
So,
you
for
drag them
example,
down
instead of
to
job
specific
title, you could do
places.
customer ID, couldn't you? That would be another.
Yeah, we could do that. So, or you could even do both. So I can actually just remove that field entirely and I can put customer ID in there instead. And then it's more dynamic. So now we've got a sum. So this now is incorrect because now we've got a sum of the different customer IDs. So we've got 30 CEO customer IDs, 9 director customer IDs. Obviously, I've already formatted this as currency. It's no longer a currency. So at this point, I would then want to go into format the cells and just change it back from a currency to just a normal number because this is no longer.
But you wouldn't want to do that. You'd want to have something like, instead of job title, you'd probably go back to that being revenue, and you'd probably change job title to customer ID, wouldn't you?
Yeah, so that's something else you could do as well. So we could, yeah, unless you wanted. So the other thing is, like, you could have a count of all the different individual customers with certain job titles, which is what I just showed you, which is, like you say, it's kind of very situationally useful. But here we could remove the job title and put the customer ID down in there instead. And now you can see the sum revenue by,
because some of those customers bought, if you go back to the original data, some of them bought more than once, didn't they?
Yes, they did, which is why if I go in here and highlight column D, right, and I go conditional formatting, highlight cell rules, duplicate values, you will see that any of the ones highlighted in red bought something more than once, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's just very useful also to just be able to highlight a column and do the highlight duplicates thing just to see who's bought more than once and stuff like that. So yeah, just kind of very useful stuff. But another thing that you might also think of as well is you might think, well, you know, we've got all these job titles down here in our pivot table. And also we've got the revenue down here, but this is a sum revenue. And it might turn out that certain people with higher job titles or something, they might be spending more because they have maybe a higher salary, and because they have a higher salary, they can buy more than one thing. And in which case you might subjectively decide, actually, that's kind of like an unfair test because, you know, we're counting up all of the different transaction revenue over here by different job title, but some job titles perform far more purchases than others. So due to that, you might then go to this right-hand column over here. And where it says values revenue, you could go value field settings. And you could actually change that from sum to an average like this. And now you have the average spend of each job title, which in some situations that might actually serve you better in terms of analysis. So it's very important to remember that over here in the value field settings, you can alter it. So you can change things. Some count.
Could you do them as separate tables, because everybody's requested the sheet afterwards? So if you could perhaps do that again, but show the sum, so they can then go and look up what you did. So instead of just so copy it rather than overwrite it. And then the other thing that I thought might be quite useful is to put more than one in the first. So you've got maybe CEO, then customer, job title, then customer ID or something underneath, so you can show them what that looks like, because I do that a lot. So instead of just having one row, you have two criteria in the rows.
Oh, okay, yeah. So for example, so we've got job title over here, and we could have job title by customer ID, like this, right? So CEO, there is only one customer ID. And then so manager, you can see let's have a look here. So we don't want this to be average anymore. We definitely want this to be sum at this point. So you can see managers spent 462, but you can also then see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different managers, right? That's the kind of thing you're trying to show, right?
So for example, if I was looking at sales by category on a website, I would have the individual category as the first one, and then I'd have the product name as the second row, like you've just done.
Cool. I'm just let's have a look here. I'm just going to quickly sort this one out as well, because you said to rather than overwriting stuff. To
because the guys really want you to share this afterwards.
Yeah, sure. So this was customer ID, and then table array was this, and then number 4 here, and then 0 here. That was then copy and pasted down like this. Index match, we completed that one, so that's fine. And we've got this chart here which connects to this table over here. So yeah, that's pretty much everything in terms of just making sure they're kind of separated out.
So what happens if you for example took your let's copy your data from your basic VLOOKUP and add something like an extra column for date or something like that? So copy it rather than get rid of it. You can still keep customer ID.
I think I'm using the index match one, so we'll go over here and
let's put by month or something.
Okay, so what, like 01/2025, 03/2022,
24 or something. Don't make them so we could just maybe do a graph against time. So if you just do December, maybe October, December, and January, something like that, so that you can.
This is going to take a bit of time. Sorry.
Or just do all of them in just one per month or something.
Like this.
You're not going to be able to graph that very easily. I was thinking of maybe, if you had some figures, maybe 2 per month or something like that, or
Okay, so maybe what we can do is we can go you can go back here, right, to February 2023. Can I just drag this down like this to December 2024? There you go.
Fine.
How about that?
So now show them how to make a graph where you've got the date, say, as the x-axis, or about some different types of graph, because you've done a pie graph, but a lot of these guys haven't even done graphs before. So
so essentially, because all of these have completely different dates and none of them are the same, in this situation I don't think you would even need to create a pivot table, because you need the full granularity of every date being different. So I'm pretty sure that what I do in this case is I just select the date column and the revenue column, because I want to see maybe revenue by date or something like that. and insert over here a line chart like this, 2D line.
Perfect.
And there you go. So then you've got, so this is like revenue by date, which is quite useful as well. So I just bold revenue because that's what it actually is. It's revenue. The fact that there's dates involved is kind of secondary. And yeah, so you can build yourself nice.
And then how would you
like
add in a legend into this one? Because of course you've just done 2 columns, but you've not said which ID it was. I guess it would be difficult to do that in this case, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so I think it would be, but I think you can actually, let's have a look here. It would be something like just select the whole thing like this. The only thing is though, I don't know if that's just going to automatically just
add
I
don't think it would work
to
either,
the line chart.
Yeah.
As a metric. But you might be able to like go not format plot area, format chart area.
I think we're just confused people now. So we probably should forget that.
In here. Yeah, okay, yeah, because that's when it starts to get. Funnily enough, if you want to do stuff like that, which is kind of more in depth, it's almost better to by that point start to kind of start looking at stuff like Looker Studio, which is kind of more dynamic in the way that it handles different data sets and stuff. But yeah, so that's kind of it. We're coming up.
Let's see what questions there are.
So.
Okay. Yeah, so could you save your document and then upload it to handouts?
Yeah.
Do you know how to do that? So if you go top right, because you need to do it now while they're still live.
Okay, so let me just check. I just need to get this. So it's the basic. Yeah, I know which sheet it is. Okay, cool. So we're heading over to here. Okay, so handouts, add a handout. Yeah, browse files. We're going to want to go over here like this. And it's going to be this one. And yep, just upload that. Off it goes.
Okay.
There we go. That should be it.
I'll just share that. So you should be able to go and get the. So let's go and have a look at. Let's do a couple of other things then. So the revenue for job title. So you've got that. So the question is, that was the pivot table with the average, wasn't it? So do you just want to show them that again?
Is that this one? Exactly. Is this one here with the average of revenue? Yeah. Okay. So we've got this pivot table here. And you can see that, I'm selecting this pivot table. Unfortunately, the big pane over here on the right-hand side that lets us control the pivot table hasn't popped up. So what we need to do is on the top menu across the top of Excel, you'll see there's this menu that pops up, and it only appears when you have a pivot table selected, and it's called Pivot Table Analyze. So you click on that. And then just to the right, the very far right, you can see there's this field list button. And so if you lose your field list, just make sure to do that because that will force it to pop up again, which is useful. And yeah, what it was originally before. So I'm just quickly going to convert it back to how it was before. So it was originally on sum. So you had all the job titles and then you had the sum of the revenue. But then, as I said, sometimes you have more than one transaction per different job role. So it's not really necessarily a mathematically fair test. And so what you do is over here, you go down to your values where we took revenue and we dragged it down there like that. So we've got revenue in here. And you click the drop down arrow and you go to this menu at the bottom that says value field settings in there. And when you're in value field settings, you can change how that value calculates. So at the moment it's on sum. And you can just change it back to average and we can click OK. And then now we then have the average that we wanted. And that's how you handle that.
Okay, so a couple more questions. My advice to anybody is do not use Excel in the browser. Always download it and use it on your desktop. It's far better much easier to use. There's a whole load of things that make it easier. If you've only got a sort of a 365 Live account or whatever, then I'm not sure how you upgrade that, but what I would definitely advise you using it. And also Excel on Apples are a bit problematic as well, unfortunately. Can you do a VLOOKUP between different sheets on the same document? So I'm guessing you can have multiple VLOOKUps for each, because you're always referring to where the data is.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So for example, so let's take this its kind of widest. So let's do this VLOOKUP again. So you can see that I've got the VLOOKUP basic sheet here, which is where I'm, you can see I've done a VLOOKUP here, and you can see that both the tables are on the same sheet. But what if instead of that, we wanted to pull back the job title, not from this table here, but perhaps from this table over here, or from a table on a different sheet. So I'm just going to.
I was going to ask you something, because one of the things I often do, because I'm not maybe not disciplined enough and have lots of separate tabs for stuff, is I'll have data like you've got your lookup table, but then I might have other data further down. And I noticed you were selecting the columns. So would that be problematic if you've got data further down in those same columns?
Yeah. But it also has another catch, which is the fact that most people don't sculpt complex tables. So if I was doing a VLOOKUP from here back over to the first table, it might be a problem because I've now got data underneath, just like you've just said, this custom thing I've made down here. But most of the time when you're working with data, it's in a relatively simple format, and most of the time you're not adding stuff underneath. And because of that, the reason that I select the column headers is so that if the table then has more rows added at a later date, it's automatically covering it.
But would you? I mean, I would, if I was trying to stitch stuff together, I'd probably put them on different tabs. Is that what you're showing now?
That's what we're going to show now. Yeah. So essentially, that's what we're going to show now. So we want to get job title again. I'm just going to hide this one quickly, and so job title. Like this, and we're going to pretend this table here doesn't exist, and we have another table in another sheet over here, and so the process is essentially the same. You just launch the VLOOKUP GUI, and we find the customer ID just like we did before, and then the slight difference comes when we go to do the table array. So we click the arrow to find the table array. We then go over here to sheet 1 like this, and you can see it's already coding the sheet reference into the formula, which is the sheet 1 exclaim. And then we select the range just the same as we did before, hit that back there. Column index number is, it's not working for some reason. I'm not sure exactly why it's doing that. I'm going to do this. I'll just do this again. I'm not sure why it's doing that. This should actually work. I've done it about 1 million times before. So just check that this doesn't have any weird, no, it doesn't have anything in here. So yeah, so equals VLOOKUP, find the lookup value, table array, over here like this. Yeah, there we go. 4, 0. And you can see you can pull that data back between different tabs in the same sheet. And not only can you pull data back between different tabs in the same sheet, but you can also pull data back between entirely different tables that are saved in entirely different documents, as long as you have them both open at the same time. However, I wouldn't personally recommend doing loads of lookups between entirely separate spreadsheets, because if in the future you're like, oh yeah, I already compiled my main sheet, I don't need that old sheet anymore, and you delete it, then you open your old sheet and it's referencing that sheet, then all of the lookups will fail. And
definitely keep it in the same file.
Yeah, that's don't try and use Excel as a database, essentially.
So there's a couple of people are asking about copying this data into, say, a report. So there's 2 ways of doing this, really. You can actually copy a table into a PowerPoint or a Word, but then the formatting tends to go all over, or you can copy it as an image, where you might use something like a snipping tool.
Yeah. I would always personally use a snipping tool, and, even if I was doing, so say these charts we've created over here. So this one, let's have a look here. So I actually wanted job titles in there, I believe, not customer ID like that. So we've got a revenue by different job titles. So if I wanted to copy and paste that into a PowerPoint myself, I'd make sure it's a reasonable size so that it's going to capture a pretty good resolution. And then over here as well, just to make sure I don't capture any of this weird grid line area, I'd probably go to the view menu and I just turn off the grid lines after I was finished assembling my charts. And then I'd use some kind of snipping tool like this, and I'd probably
see, interestingly, I actually copy the chart and then I can edit it, because it's usually in the wrong format.
Yeah,
it's got the wrong fonts, or it's not big enough. or I might want to add the legends and things. So I actually, as more likely, I will copy the data into my PowerPoint presentation and edit it.
And rebuild the chart, maybe. Yeah, although that can take quite a lot of time. So I think you guys just saw one of my screenshots there that I was playing from Dark Souls 2 as well. So sorry about that. Yeah, what was I doing?
There's lots of people that are really have no idea at all. Do you have any recommended places where you'd go and learn Excel? Would YouTube be the best place?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of places. Honestly, even just places like Code Academy and stuff, where you can get lots of free information. If you even just do Google searches on how to do a formula that very specifically does this, quite often you'll come back with some of the old Excel forums like Mr. Excel and stuff like that.
Okay,
really useful places.
We've got a couple of minutes left. I wanted to just mention two things. I don't know whether you can quickly share your screen and go to Julius.ai.
Yeah, I can certainly do that. So let's have a look here. So is that like
Julius
this?
Caesar.
Julius. Oh.
You might have to search it. And then can you copy and paste your original data? You might have to sign up as you'll probably want to sign up.
I don't think I've got time to sign up.
But basically,
right
you could copy you can copy your you can just sign in with your login, your Google login. Yeah, just
can you do that?
Sign up with your Google login.
I didn't know that. Oh, fair enough then. So let's just use this.
And then copy your original data and ask them to pivot and give you job title by revenue.
Cool. Okay, let's give that a try. So what we've got here.
This is really cool. You're going to love this, James.
I'm sure.
And while we're just waiting for James to do that, if you could give, if you found this really useful today, if you could give James a review, that'd be amazing. There's a Google review just gone up, and I'll just put the more easier to do, which is the reviews.io. And the reason it's easier is because you don't have to log in.
So can I paste it?
No,
or
you
do
can
I have
just
to
paste
upload
it.
the file? Okay, so paste it in here. And then I can just type.
Yeah. Please provide me.
Right? So
please provide me the revenue by job title and see whether it'll come up. So there are lots of other tools that you can use, like ChatGPT, to do some of this, but ChatGPT isn't as good. Has it done it already? No.
It's having a think
then
about it.
It shows you it's working on its Python script.
In Python. Yeah, that is definitely building a Python script. Import Panda as PD. Panda is engine for analyzing data and information, I think. So okay, so it creates code, then it's executing code. And there you go. So, well, let's just compare, shall we, against the pivot table that I made. So 120, 200, 120, 200.
Look how quick that was.
614. Yeah, and that's accurate information. I wonder if it can you now build me a pie chart of this?
Oh, yes, it can.
Let's do this. Oh, this is going to impress me if it can do this accurately. Yeah, AI is getting more powerful.
This particular AI has been trained specifically on data and analysis.
There you go. So here's the pie chart up here.
You can't really edit it in the same way that you can. You could ask it to put the legends on the side. You could ask it to, just.
Yeah. Let's do that. Off it goes again. This is actually
impressive, isn't it?
Pretty impressive. Yeah, that is impressive. Yeah, it's struggling a little bit with the formatting, but that is accurate. That is data accurate.
Yeah.
I mean, if we compare it to the pie chart I made over here, okay, so they're rotated at a different orientation, but all of the pie segments are roughly the same size. So
excellent.
Yeah, pretty good.
Okay, guys. I think we've answered all the questions. Have you all got your handouts, guys? Because you need to go and grab your handouts before you go, because they won't be here. I don't think they'll be attached to the video. I don't think we've answered every single question because there was a lot. But there is lots of, yes. The other thing that you can do is when you get the video, you can put it through a transcribe tool, and then get the words that James has shared as well. Thank you so much, guys. It's just the handout of the Excel spreadsheet at the end of the day, so you can go and have a look at the formulas. I'm not sure Jess, do you know what's next week?
Sorry. Yeah, it's 2025 meta updates with Emil next week, which is on the website, ready for registration now. So if everyone wants to register early, but we'll be sending an email out on Monday for you to register if you don't do it now.
And if you've got any DMI students, they'll get a separate form, won't they, to register their hour. Excellent. Thanks a lot, everybody. See you soon. Thanks, James. That was amazing. Bye. Bye.
Thanks, guys.